So there's something that's not really being talked about a whole lot. I mean, it has been reported to some degree, but this is a much larger story that most people are just kind of not hearing through the more traditional means of like morning or evening news. There have been some outlets, I believe MSNBC and CNN talked about it a bit, but it was usually like in one of the midday broadcasts, not when they're like peak hours. And I believe it was Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, and what's the other guy? Seth Meyers. I think they did cover it a little bit, but this is something that I think really should be kind of hammered into everybody's heads. This came out a few days back. This is a 6-point plan advanced by Trump lawyer John Eastman for Vice President Pence to overturn the election on January 6th. The reason why I'm mentioning this, and like a lot of people are like, God, we've heard so much about January 6th, January 6th, January 6th. This isn't the only evidence that they were actually trying to do something. And this is legit one of Trump's fucking lawyers writing a step-by-step how to do a coup. Now, there's ways that people can argue that, well, January 6th wasn't an attempt at a coup, and I still don't buy it. It was bad. I mean, usually people do things like, well, yeah, it was bad, but it wasn't a coup. Okay, well, if you want to define it that way, you're bypassing that whole "it was bad." It was bad. Well, I don't think it was treason. You know, it was bad, but I don't think it was it was bad. Bad. And it was a very fundamental existential threat to something that was really legit happening at the time. So anytime somebody's like, well, yeah, that was crazy, but I just stop listening. I immediately stop fucking listening. But this is the kind of shit that you can't say, yeah, but. That's why it's important. That's why I think this is something that really needs to be gone over. And that's why I'm just making my little corner of the internet. I'm going to at least add my voice out to it because I agree. So this was step-by-step, 6-point plan by a Trump lawyer to send to Pence to get him to do this. Vice President Pence, presiding over the joint session for Senate Pro Tempore Grassley, if Pence recuses himself, begins to open and count the ballots, starting with Alabama. When he gets to Arizona, he announces he has multiple slates of electors, and so is going to defer decision on that until finishing the other states. This will be the first break with the procedure set out in the act. So when they're going through for the confirmation hearing, they start to go through the states, and the vice president is basically like there as the master of ceremonies. He's hosting the whole thing. He kind of runs like the process. It's how it goes. And he would say, well, have some issues with these, so we're going to keep going through, but I am not going to make the decision on those states until finishing everybody else. At the end, he announces that because of the ongoing disputes in the 7 states, there are no electors that could be deemed validly appointed in those states. So basically, don't care what you electors have to say. We're not going to be able to do that. That means the total number of electors appointed, the language of the 12th Amendment, is 454. So they're short electors. This reading of the 12th Amendment has also been advanced by Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe. A majority of the electors appointed would therefore be 228. There are at this point 232 votes for Trump, 222 votes for Biden. Pence then gavels President Trump as reelected. What this means is they pull out those 7 states, and those 7 states went to Biden. I believe all of them. It might have been, but for the majority, would dissolve most of the actual vote, or dissolve those votes, and then the amount of required that need to come in would shrink, and so now you need a majority, and now you'd have more, and President Trump is then reelected. If this seems really fucking snaky, it's because it is. This is fucking gross. Howls, of course, from the Democrats who now claim, contrary to Tribe's prior position, that 270 is required. So Pence says, fine, pursuant to the 12th Amendment, no candidate has achieved the necessary majority. That sends the matter to the House, where the votes will be taken by the states, representatives from each state having 1 vote. Republicans currently have control of 26 of the state delegations, the bare majority needed to win that vote. President Trump is reelected there as well. So you dissolve the entire democratic process of how we vote, then using our electors and electoral college, and you then send it to the House, which at the time was Republican-controlled, with just one extra more vote than Democrats, well, two technically, and then they would reelect President Trump. One last piece, assuming the Electoral Count Act process is followed upon getting the objections to the Arizona slates, the two houses break into their separate chambers. We should not allow the Electoral Count Act constraint on debate to control. That would mean that a prior legislature was determining the rules of the present one, a constitutional no-no. It's kind of self-explanatory. That creates a stalemate that would give the state legislatures more time to weigh in to formally support the alternate slate of electors if they had not already done so. Basically, confuse the issue and allow for more time and then the actual push for alternate slate of electors. The main thing here is that Pence should do this without asking for permission, either from a vote of the joint session or from the court. So, no conferring with the courts. Anybody else that's a government official, he should just arbitrarily make that decision, which then is a whole nother big bag of troubling shit. Let the other side challenge his actions in court, where Tribe, who in 2001 conceded the president of the Senate might be in charge of counting the votes, and others who would press a lawsuit would have their past position. These are non-justicatable political questions thrown back at them to get the lawsuit dismissed. Fact is, the Constitution assigns this power to the vice president as the ultimate arbiter. We should take all of our actions with that in mind. Does this start to like really cohesively make sense? Like, the idea is entirely to subvert the very basic fundamental process by how we have always elected our presidents, well, for a very long time elected our presidents, to erase that process or to game the system of that process by sowing the seeds of potential discord, which, after we investigated, we found out there was not any evidence that was going to be compelling enough to say that those electors in those states were not valid. It was built entirely on hysteria and a lie. It was political positioning that was done very explicitly and intentionally to try and change an election that hadn't even happened yet, and to ensure that they would be able to maintain it and go in. The only thing that stopped them from trying this, and I don't think that they would have succeeded, but the only thing that kept them from trying this is Pence didn't do it. Now, there's been a couple of like rumors on why exactly that was. I kind of get the feeling that Pence was never going to do it to begin with. I don't really necessarily think that Pence was a very big fan of Donald Trump in general, because he's a career politician, whereas Trump was a reality show host. And quite a few people who have been a long time in Washington very vocally comment on how much they did not like this. How would you want to say it? Maybe a souring of the political mechanism, the machine of how it's supposed to work. And then if that whole gaming of the system and changing the way that we actually count the votes didn't work, then they would just send it to the House. And because of the majority that they had at that point, then they could just arbitrarily do it. It's important that we understand these things and we don't just brush them off, because we have to understand how close we came and how close we can come to people infiltrating into our democracy and trying to make changes despite how our system actually works and how the will of the people perceive it to work. It's fucking crazy. We have a billion fucking problems with the government. Politicians are almost irrevocably fucking corrupt. Democrats and Republicans. 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100, a politician is a piece of shit. Just how it goes. But when something is this fucking overt, we need to pay attention. We need to know how close we can come and make sure we never get that close again.